Hello, my friends. This is Doug Fabian. Welcome to my weekly ETF report. Today is Wednesday, April 29th, 2015. Thank you for joining me. As always, three things to talk about. And today I'm going to stay broad regarding the financial markets because we're closing out the month of April. And April was a good month for stocks, not so good for bonds. Let me review the scoreboard with you briefly. Now, through today's close, the S&P 500 is up about 1.8% for the month of April. The NASDAQ 100 up 3% for the month of April. Both of these indexes hit new all-time highs during the past 30 days. Now, obviously, when an index hits a new all-time high, it's in an uptrend, and U.S. stocks remain in an uptrend, but haven't made a lot of progress so far this year, up a little bit more than 2% for the major indices. Looking internationally, things much better. First of all, April, big month for emerging markets, up almost 9%. China up 17% in a single month. Europe was up 4%, Japan was up 5%. So the global market's doing much better than the US. Turning now to bonds, we didn't have that good a month in the bond market, down about 1% overall as I looked at the different bond indices. So that means interest rates rose a little bit during the month. Also, the US dollar was down 3% during the month of April. Now, the US dollar's strength has been a big worry in the financial markets. Let me close out my comments on the scoreboard here for April looking at these two charts. The first is SPY, the ETF that represents the S&P 500. You can see still in an uptrend above its 50-day, above its 200-day. And then the second chart I'm sharing with you is the Emerging Markets ETF. And the difference between the two is I believe that the emerging markets are just beginning a new uptrend, and perhaps the S&P 500 is getting a little bit tired. Because this brings us to the second point of my presentation today, which is economic statistics. And we got statistics out today on the first quarter's economic growth for the U.S., and it came in at a 0.2% growth rate in GDP. Now, this is a preliminary number. It's going to get revised, but the problems were the winter, the West Coast port strike, and just general economic weakness. The stock market in the U.S. may be a bit ahead of itself relative to the economic growth that we're seeing in the economy. So that's kind of the heads up I'm giving you relative to the financial markets. Now, the Fed came out today and said that, hey, we're going to raise interest rates at some point in time. We're just not going to tell you when, and we're not going to do it in the near term. So that's kind of the synopsis of what's going on in the markets. Sometimes there's not a lot to do, and we've got to look to other areas of our personal finances if we want to continue to move towards our long-term goals. This brings me to point number 3. I am calling the month of May, which will begin on Friday, of course, and carry on for the next 30 days. I'm calling the month of May Tax Solution Month. And I believe that managing taxes is a project just like tending a garden or getting in shape. You need to work on your taxes. And we just completed, of course, the month of April with tax filings for 2014. We're moving on to 2015. And I've been soliciting on my different radio podcasts questions from listeners about taxes and their tax situation. So I'm going to be talking a lot about taxes in the next month, not quite as much about exchange-traded funds, but still trying to help you with your personal finance goals. A couple of things I'll just remind you about. Number 1, I believe the Roth IRA is by far the best single investment account that you can contribute to if you qualify. Number 2, you must look at your entire tax situation early enough in the year to make some decisions. So planning needs to be a part of your tax homework as we're going through the course of this year. And then, of course, you need to look at doing some other things, paying down debt, these kinds of basic personal finance things to improve your overall situation. I want to remind you that even though I'm standing in front of my ETFU banner. And of course, I do my weekly podcast on ETF success. I also do another podcast called Doug Fabian's Wealth Strategies for high net worth investors. And in my Wealth Strategies podcast, I'm going to be focusing very deeply on this subject of taxes. I'll talk about taxes too on ETF success, but strategies is all about helping high net worth investors realize their goals, especially in retirement. So those are the three things I had for you today. Always open to your comments and questions. My email address, askdoug@dougfabian.com. And don't forget to listen to this week's podcast on ETF success with Doug Fabian, which will be available on Friday. Thanks so much for tuning in.